Hoffa, a novelization by Ken Englade, based on the script by David Mamet, performed by Jerry Orbach. 1975. Sometimes Jimmy Hoffa spoke so softly that Bobby Chiaro had trouble hearing him. This was one of those times. "You think he really wants to settle this?" Hoffa whispered, barely moving his lips in a style he developed while serving time in a federal prison in Pennsylvania. Chiaro turned down the radio. "Oh, yeah," he replied. "I think he realizes that none of us got anything to gain as long as this keeps up." Hoffa grunted, then leaned back in the passenger seat and closed his eyes. Chiaro turned the radio back up and concentrated on the traffic, competently guiding the new green Pontiac Grandville south on Interstate 75 at a steady 59 miles per hour, slightly over the speed limit, but not enough to make it worth a cop's while to pull them over. The first thing you learned as a professional driver, he thought, was to watch the goddamn road. On the radio, Gordon Lightfoot was singing about how every time he thought he was winning, he was losing again. Chiaro chuckled to himself. Maybe that ought to be our theme song, he thought. It's been the story of our lives, mine and Jimmy's, for almost 20 years, even before Kennedy and McClellan, those pricks, began their vendetta against the boss. Hoffa, who had appeared to be dozing, shifted uncomfortably. "You want to hear this?" Chiaro asked, his hand moving toward the control knob. "Nah," Hoffa replied. Then, after a pause, "The only news I want to hear is we got this business finished and we can get back to doing what we do best." Chiaro flicked a quick glance at his friend and employer, then shifted his attention back to the road. The years, 5 of them in that shitheel prison, physically hadn't been that bad on the boss, he reflected. He still looked like he could more than hold his own in a brawl. Hoffa stretched, drawing his arms back behind his head and flexing. "You hungry?" Chiaro asked. "No," Hoffa said. "Joe fixed me a sandwich just before you came. You?" "I had a late breakfast," Chiaro replied. Hoffa gazed at Chiaro fondly. He loved the man more than he loved his own brother. "Besides," he grinned, revealing a wide expanse of strong white teeth, one of his most distinguishing features, and one the cartoonists loved to caricature, "you couldn't pay me enough to eat with that asshole anyway. He might drop rat poison in my salad." "Not a chance," Chiaro grinned. "If he decided to get rid of you, he'd hire some schmuck to do it for him while he stayed somewhere safe and made sure his ass was protected." Hoffa nodded grimly in agreement, but said nothing. When Chiaro saw the sign for the Machus Red Fox, he wheeled the Pontiac into the parking lot and slowly cruised down the rows of vehicles. The lot was jammed with semis, big 18-wheelers that continually cross and recross the country, carrying everything from toilet paper and dog food to industrial waste. "What you think?" he asked Hoffa, pulling into an empty space near the rear of the lot, not far from the tractor-trailer. "Park or leave?" Hoffa looked at his watch. "It's 1:47. Where the fuck is he?" "You want to wait?" Chiaro asked. "Fucking A," Hoffa snapped. "I don't want him to be able to say that Hoffa didn't try." They sat in silence for another 10 minutes. As they waited, Hoffa grew increasingly agitated, obviously not a man who suffered another's disregard for punctuality. He glanced at Chiaro, who was anxiously watching the entrance for the first sign of Dally D'Alessandro's caddy. Unlike himself, Chiaro wasn't obsessed with physical fitness. His stomach, once as hard and flat as an asphalt highway, had grown hugely and had bulged over his belt. As he struggled to divert his thoughts from the impending meeting, Hoffa thought about Chiaro. His memory flew back to when they first met. It was in the fall, he recalled vividly, and it was dark, and the highway wasn't nearly as crowded as that same road was today. 1938. Jimmy Hoffa was barreling down the 2-lane blacktop behind the wheel of a Ford 3-window coupe, speeding as usual and pushing the little car as fast as it would go. By the time he drew abreast of the Chevrolet truck parked on the shoulder, it was too late to stop, so he drove down the road for almost a quarter of a mile before applying the brakes and executing a neat U-turn. More slowly than he'd been traveling the first time, Hoffa retraced his path, passing the truck going the opposite way. 20 yards on the other side of the vehicle, Hoffa did another U-turn and pulled in behind it. On his second pass, Hoffa had spotted the top of the driver's head, which was barely visible through the side window. He's getting a few minutes of sleep, Hoffa thought. "If I'm not back in 10 minutes, he told his companion, a slim blonde, "go on back without me." In the few months since he had signed on as an organizer with the International Brotherhood of Teamsters, Hoffa had learned enough to be careful about approaching a driver who appeared to be asleep in his vehicle on the side of the road. It had become popular of late for men bent on assault and robbery to sneak up on snoozing drivers, incapacitate them before they fully woke up, steal their money and often their truck along with the cargo, and leave the unfortunate driver along the side of the road, either beaten into unconsciousness or dead. It was also possible, Hoffa knew, that the person behind the wheel was not really a driver, but a company-hired goon setting a trap for union organizers like himself. Playing by his own rules for self-preservation, Hoffa approached the truck as noisily as he could. The last thing he wanted was to give the driver the impression that he was trying to sneak up on him. "I'm gonna bet that you're awake in there," Hoffa called out. When he got no response, he tried again, only louder. "I figured I'd like to talk to you," Hoffa said as companionably as he could. "About what?" the driver responded. Deducing that he was in no immediate danger of having to square off against a physical attack, Hoffa moved closer to the truck. "You ain't making money sitting here by the side of the road. Start driving. Put me in the cab and I'll keep you up." "You with the Teamsters?" the driver asked, betraying more belligerence than curiosity. "Fucking A." "I can't take you, fella," the driver said, his tone unyielding. "They find out you rode in my cab and I'm out of a job." "Well, I'm coming with you whether you like it or not." As the truck accelerated, Hoffa opened the door and climbed inside. "You want to live your life that way?" Hoffa asked. "Some guy in Duluth going to tell you who goes in the cab?" "I said..." "Fuck what you said," Hoffa snapped. "What's your name?" "Charo, Bobby Charo." "Hey, Bobby Charo, you want to pull the rig over and fight it out? Fine, we'll do that." Charo opened his mouth, but Hoffa quickly cut him off. "Don't talk, Bobby. Listen. Listen to what I'm fucking telling you. Listen to me." For the next hour, as they traveled through the night down the length of Michigan, Hoffa explained to Charo how the Teamsters began as the Team Drivers International Union in 1899, when 9 Midwestern locals were given a charter from the American Federation of Labor. 3 years later, some of the members broke away and started a new organization, which was called the Teamsters National Union. But despite a spurt in membership to almost 14,000 men, the TNU began falling apart, mainly as a result of corruption within the ranks. "There's nothing worse," Hoffa spat, "than guys who would sell out their own brothers for a few lousy bucks." In an attempt to save the Union, Hoffa explained, "long before you and me was born." AFL President Samuel Gompers engineered a merger of the original group, the Team Drivers, and the splinter group, the TMU. The result was the creation of a third group called the International Brotherhood of Teamsters, Chauffeurs, Warehousemen, and Helpers of America. "What I'm trying to say," Hoffa said, groping for the right words, "is that we gotta stick together. Our strength is that there are more of us than there are of them. Right now, we've got a half million members around the country. They had their way, what would it be? You'd be working slave labor, driving the roads for nothing. All I'm saying is that for our side, that's yours and mine, there's a lot more there for us." "Like what?" Charo broke in. "Like downtime pay," Hoffa replied quickly. "No," Charo began. "Yes," Hoffa yelled. "They treat us like dirt," Charo conceded. "Every couple of weeks some son of a bitch falls asleep because he's been driving for 18 hours. "I know that." "If we're stuck 10, 12 hours because a rig is broken down, we don't get no pay." "I know that," Hoffa repeated. "Why do you think we're trying to strike the company?" "I can't go out on strike." "You can't afford not to go," Hoffa argued. "You see—" "What's that?" Charo broke in. Ahead of them a truck stop loomed into view. "I'll get out here," Hoffa said, rolling down his sleeves and groping on the dash for his cufflinks. "How are you going to get back?" Hoffa shrugged. "Another driver, a guy like you." Reaching into his wallet, he extracted a business card. "Now listen to me, baby. I want you to stop by." "I can't sign up with you," Charo protested. "You will sign up," Hoffa predicted confidently. "But I didn't say sign up. I said stop by." He stopped in mid-sentence. "Uh-oh," he said, peering into the darkness. Following his gaze, Charo could make out the forms of 4 men huddled around a late-model sedan. "Drop me here," Hoffa commanded. "You don't want to be seen with me." Charo did not argue. Slowing the truck, he angled toward a far corner of the parking lot away from the men. When the truck was between them, Hoffa opened the door and jumped lightly to the ground, disappearing quickly into the darkness. "Don't forget," he said just before he leaped. come by and see me." Chiaro, intent on the men, did not reply. "Where you going?" Georgie Ventura asked a few days later. "Kroger's," Hoffa replied, pulling on his jacket. "Back to the scene of the crime, huh?" Ventura grinned. "Fuck you," Hoffa replied good-naturedly. The two of them smiled conspiratorially. 7 years previously, when both of them were only 18, they had been the ringleaders behind an impromptu strike at the Kroger Grocery and Baking Company on Green Avenue, not far from the West End neighborhood where Hoffa, his recently widowed mother, brother, and 2 sisters had lived since moving to Detroit in 1923. A little more than a year after the strike, Hoffa and Ventura quit Kroger's to go to work as full-time organizers for the Teamsters. Despite the wedge Hoffa and Ventura had created at Kroger's in 1931 by introducing the first union into the company, progress had not continued. By 1938, the workers' situation at the facility had deteriorated to the point that Hoffa felt it was imperative to make a move that would once again bring the union into a position of power. Management refused to discuss the issues. "We will never negotiate," was the proclamation from the top. The only alternative left, Hoffa knew, was a strike. "You're going back and stir 'em up all over again, huh?" Ventura asked. "I'm going to try," Hoffa said, pulling on his fedora. "If you get free later, come on over." "Luck," Ventura told Hoffa as he opened the door. "Give 'em hell." The Kroger warehouse, a low-slung, unattractive building whose reason for existence obviously was more functional than aesthetic, was between Green and West End, just south of Fort. To get to the building, Hoffa parked his coupe on Vanderbilt, well away from the warehouse, and walked the 3 blocks to the site. Heading up West End along the eastern boundary of Fisher Body's Fleetwood plant, Hoffa was making the turn onto Bacon to get to the unloading area when he had to leap out of the way to avoid being hit by a Kroger-bound Chevrolet truck. "You dumb fucking asshole!" Hoffa screamed, extending the middle finger of his right hand as he scrambled out of the truck's path. As the truck sped past him, Hoffa glanced at the man behind the wheel. "I'll be damned," he said in surprise. "That's Mr. Bobby fucking Chiaro." Stopping to talk to the picketers, Hoffa made some suggestions to the men regarding the dispersal of forces, then strode resolutely toward the unloading dock. Standing on the platform was a burly, middle-aged man in work pants and a heavy jacket. "Back it up! Back it up! Drive it! Back it up! Are you looking at me?" The foreman named Burns was screaming at Chiaro, who was maneuvering his vehicle into position at the dock. "I hear you," Chiaro growled, unhappy with being talked to like a rookie driver. "I know how to drive a fucking truck." Hoffa stood silently on the side, watching as Chiaro backed expertly up to the dock, and Burns scribbled on his clipboard. "Okay, Chiaro," Burns ordered, having finished his paperwork. "Let's get this motherfucker unloaded." Chiaro nodded, stripping off his windbreaker. Tossing it onto a stack of empty boxes, he stepped briskly across the platform to where men already were unloading the crates of produce. Falling into place among the ant-like bearers, Chiaro went down a short flight of steps and was carrying his box toward a storage area when Hoffa stepped forward, blocking his path. "What the shit?" Chiaro said, recognizing Hoffa, but still as surprised at seeing him as Hoffa had been when he realized who the truck driver had been. "What are you doing here? Get the fuck out of my way!" "I'll get out of your way," Hoffa said sarcastically, bunching his fists. Turning to another worker approaching with a crate, Hoffa urged him to join the Teamsters pickets. "If you put it down, they can't move it," Hoffa argued. "Put it down, pal. The Teamsters want you to join up." Hoffa walked backwards, keeping pace with the crate-carrying worker. "You ever pray you could be strong enough to make something of yourself?" he asked the man in a conversational tone. "Put the crate down and come over with your brothers." The man stopped and stared at Hoffa. "You know," he said softly, "you're right. I've had enough of these assholes. They treat me like I'm shit, and I'm fucking tired of it." "You got yourself a new member," he said. Hoffa smiled. "Smart man." Turning to the other workers, he bellowed, "Did you see that, you men? He put the crate down. Now you put them down." "Good, good," Hoffa shouted as several more workers put down their crates and walked off. "You got a right to negotiate. You got a right to demand a fair wage." He stopped when he sensed movement behind him and turned to see Chiaro bearing down on him, his fists clenched, his eyes blazing. "You!" Hoffa screamed at him. That fucking Burns, Charo interjected. He just fucking fired me, and it's your fault. You better watch every step you take, because one day I'm going to be waiting for you. Blow it out your ass, Hoffa sneered. You ain't man enough to take me now or any time. Charo shook his fist menacingly. Remember what I told you, he shouted, stalking off. Hoffa shrugged. Listen to that asshole, he said, turning back to the workers. You see what happened to him? Don't put up with that shit anymore. Drop those crates and join the Teamsters. 3 days later, Hoffa and Billy Flynn, an organizer for Local 299, paid an evening visit to the Idle Hour Laundry at Verner and Lansing to try to talk the owner, Harold Burleson, into recognizing a group of his drivers and negotiating with them on wages and working conditions. I ain't gonna do it, Burleson told the pair as he leaned on the yellowing Formica counter. This is my business and I'll run it like I want. If I do what you want and give them a deal where they work only 55 hours a week, the next thing you know, they'll only want to work 50. Before long, they'll be demanding 45 or 40. No, Mr. Burleson, Hoffa broke in. You ain't listening. All I'm saying is talk to these people. Sit down and negotiate a settlement with your drivers. Me and Billy ain't here to tell you how to run your business. We don't even represent your drivers. They ain't Teamsters. Not yet, anyway. That's what I'm afraid of, Burleson replied, staring at Flynn, who loomed over him. Afraid? Hoffa asked in mock surprise. Aw, come on, Mr. Burleson. We're reasonable people. Burleson looked again at Flynn, a 6'4" giant with a 5-inch-long knife scar along the left side of his throat and a cauliflower left ear, a souvenir of an early and unhappy attempt to be a professional fighter, and he shuddered. About as reasonable as my wife when she wants money for a new dress, he stammered. Now, how about getting out of here so I can close up? Hoffa felt his temper rise. Okay, he hollered. Don't say I didn't give you a chance. Throwing up his hands, he stalked out of the building. Pausing to write himself a reminder to revisit Burleson, Hoffa did not immediately see the figure that materialized out of the shadows and stopped at his side. Chiaro, Hoffa exclaimed. God damn, you're persistent. Chiaro removed his hand from his pocket. Clutched in his fist was a knife with a 6-inch blade. You cost me my job, Chiaro mumbled between gritted teeth. You're obviously a man with a profound sense of justice, Hoffa said mockingly, unintimidated. Flynn caught up with him. What's the problem, boss? He asked Hoffa. Chiaro turned to him. Back off, he ordered. I got no quarrel with you. Flynn studied the man with a professional eye. Well, yes you do, lad. You got a beef with my partner, you got a beef with me. Get fucking back, Chiaro warned. No, Flynn said, speaking reasonably. Reaching inside his coat, he removed a black revolver from the waistband of his trousers. Chiaro stared at Flynn's pistol. Nodding, he slowly raised his left hand and closed the blade of the knife. Hoffa smiled. I like you, Bobby, tough guy Chiaro. You're a practical man, and you don't scare easy. What say we go get a cup of coffee? 1941. All things considered, Hoffa told himself, as he sat in his Ford in the dark waiting for the right time to make an entrance, I'm getting pretty fucking sick of Kroger's. From where he sat, Hoffa could easily see the pickets a half-block away, marching resolutely outside the company's main gate. The men themselves were mainly silent, marching soundlessly, while a man standing on top of a nearby truck urged them on. But if he is a friend to labor, the speaker was saying through a megaphone, he is the only friend you got, and you best listen to that man. If he's got the scars on his knuckles, if he's got the muscles in his arms, if he's been out on the road like you and me. Hoffa sighed. Time to go to work, he thought. Tapping a dozing Bobby Chiaro on the shoulder, Hoffa motioned him to rouse himself and follow him. Without speaking, they climbed out of the car and began walking toward the group of picketers. As they got closer to the gate, Hoffa could hear the speaker more clearly. That the race of labor, as the race of Israel of old, is saddened, and our women mourn. Hoffa quit listening to study the approach of Frank Fitzsimmons, a new organizer for Local 299. A pudgy, soft-looking man a couple of years older than Hoffa, Fitzsimmons had come into the organization on the recommendation of Dan Tobin himself. Hoffa wasn't sure yet about Fitzsimmons, but he knew better than to ignore a suggestion from the Teamsters International president. They ought to shoot that motherfucker, Hoffa said to Charo and Fitzsimmons, referring to the man with the megaphone. Let 'em organize the dead. Fitzsimmons grinned nervously, not sure how to react. Hoffa rolled his eyes. But instead of pursuing the issue with his new organizer, he shouted at a small contingent of armed men who were riding on the running board of a passing truck. Get down off the truck, you fucking stooges, you scabs! Putting as much disgust in his voice as he could muster, he asked rhetorically, What is lower than a scab? The men stared at him impassively. Nothing, Hoffa screamed at the men. There's nothing that's lower than a fucking scab. Where's your self-respect? They don't have any self-respect, Charo joined in, enjoying the game. They're just fucking slime. Stepping boldly in front of a truck whose driver was shifting gears, Hoffa held up his hand like a policeman and defied the driver to run him down. The man slammed on his brakes, stopping just inches short of Hoffa, who, the best that Charo could tell, was trying to emulate a fire hydrant. They're gonna screw you, pal, Hoffa yelled at the driver. You think they're gonna be loyal to you because you crossed this line? The driver put his truck back into gear, gunned the engine, and released the clutch, sending the vehicle forward. Charo, shocked to see that Hoffa gave no indication that he was going to move, reached out a thick arm and dragged him out of the truck's path just in time. That cocksucker would have run you down, Charo screamed at Hoffa. You gotta watch these guys. Fuck them, Hoffa shouted back. Charo and Hoffa were so caught up in the action that they failed to see two men approach silently to their rear. The men, dressed somberly in dark suits, white shirts, and ties, were clearly neither picketers nor part of the Kroger goon squad. Saying nothing, they slipped into the shadows, their backs to a parked truck. We're blowing this fucking strike, Hoffa said to Charo. As he spoke, several police cars, sirens wailing, screeched to a halt at the head of the line. As if their arrival were a signal, the tailgates of several of the waiting trucks dropped open, and men carrying baseball bats, pieces of lumber, and sections of pipe jumped to the ground. Oh, hell, Hoffa exclaimed to Charo. Now we're going to get into another fucking brawl. See you guys later, Fitzsimmons said, moving quickly to keep away from the line of approaching goons. Keep your heads down. Ignoring Fitzsimmons, Charo turned his attention toward the man with the megaphone. Hoffa, repelled by the man's oratory, shook his head in loathing. Why don't he fucking learn how to handle a situation like this? He asked Charo plaintively. Charo shrugged. That just makes it harder for us, Hoffa said, striding toward one of the trucks. Let's see if we can't rescue this fucking disaster. When he moved, the two men who had been watching from the shadows moved with him, inching closer but still staying in the background. Catching the movement out of the corner of his eye, Hoffa noticed the pair for the first time. The men advanced slowly on Hoffa, and he backed carefully away, stepping into the mouth of a nearby alley. The two men paused and reached into their pockets. They drew pistols, which they leveled at Hoffa. It took Charo, who had not seen the confrontation, several minutes to realize that Hoffa was no longer at his side. Jimmy, he called. Where you at? When he saw the two men, he pulled up short. What the fuck? He exclaimed, spotting the pistols. The men glanced quickly at Charo, then turned their attention back to Hoffa, keeping their weapons pointed at his chest. Charo, realizing an attack was not impending, barked at them. Who are you? He demanded. What do you want? I think they want me, Bobby, Hoffa said calmly, but I haven't the faintest fucking idea why. Follow us, one of the men commanded. As directed, Hoffa and Charo climbed into the Ford and followed the two men, who had retrieved their black Cadillac from a nearby side street. Shortly, in order not to attract police attention, the two-car caravan wound its way deep into Detroit's Little Italy. The caddy pulled to the curb across the street from a restaurant called Trattoria Antonio. Hoffa swung in behind it. After a short exchange in rapid Italian, Charo pointed to the building next door to the restaurant. That's where he says to go, Charo said, gesturing toward a plain-looking storefront distinguished only by a large glass window across the narrow front. Gold lettering on the window read, The Palermo Club, and underneath in smaller letters, Members Only. Just remember one thing, Charo whispered to Hoffa as they crossed the street. Don't lose your temper. No matter what they say, keep calm. Hoffa was surprised that the door to the club was unlocked, and even more surprised to find that the room they entered was so sparsely decorated. Chiaro glanced around, then motioned for Hoffa to follow him across the room and down a short hallway, which was dimly illuminated by a weak bulb in an overhead fixture. When they got to the end of the hall, Chiaro rapped twice on the door, pushed it open, and stepped inside. Blinking in the light, Hoffa saw that there was a dining table in the center of the room, covered with an immaculate starched white cloth. At the head of the table was a frail-looking man in his late 50s. On his right was another man, somewhat younger but still middle-aged. On the old man's left was a much younger man, someone closer to Hoffa's age, who was as fair as the old man was dark. 2 husky men and a frail youth dressed as a waiter hovered in the background. "Signor Sciala," Chiaro said, recognizing the man immediately. The old man, Sciala, nodded slightly but made no attempt to shake hands. "Jimmy," Chiaro continued, quickly recognizing the others, "this is Signor Antonio Balucchio," nodding at the man on Sciala's right, "and Signor Carol D'Alessandro." The man on Hoffa's left, D'Alessandro, the one closer to Hoffa's age, smiled brightly, the only one to signal a welcome. Hoffa nodded, quickly assessing the situation. He knew from what he had heard on the street that Sciala ran a manpower rental service, hiring out lower-level members of his organization to large companies, particularly automobile manufacturers, as strikebreakers. He did a lot of business with Ford, Hoffa had heard, and he undoubtedly provided the men who were in the trucks at that evening's demonstration at Kroger's. "Sit," Chiaro told Hoffa, pointing to the empty seat at the other end of the table. Hoffa plopped into the straight-backed chair and leaned forward, placing his hands palm down on the table in front of him. "So," he said, drumming his fingers on the tabletop, "you brought me here. What do you want?" Sciala waved his hand angrily. "Voglio fargli sapere il seguente, che lui sta costando I soldi ai miei amici, che gli sta costando il lavoro, che lui sta fottendo tutta la mia operazione." "He says," Chiaro said evenly, "that you are costing his friends money, that you are costing them jobs, that you cost me my job, that you are pissing on his fucking operation. You represent labor, and his people represent management." "Se fosse nel psotto mio, che cosa farebbe lei?" "He wants to know," Chiaro translated, "what would you do if you were in his place?" Hoffa paused. "Tell him," he said in a conversational tone, "that if he gives me a cup of coffee, I'll answer his question." When Chiaro translated, the old man responded with the barest hint of a smile. Turning to the boy dressed like a waiter, Sciala ordered refreshment for his guests. Walking up to Local 299's new headquarters on Trumbull Avenue near Tiger Stadium, Hoffa could hear the president, Ron Mahoney, as he struggled to bring order to the chaos that reigned within the building. His words were met by a cacophony of yells, whistles, catcalls, and foot-stomping. As Hoffa walked through the door, Mahoney was waving his arms and trying to be heard over the roar. Hoffa joined Chiaro and Fitzsimmons, who were leaning against the wall on Mahoney's left. Both Chiaro and Fitzsimmons had mugs in their hands filled with beer. In response to Mahoney's repeated pleas for quiet, the noise in the room subsided to the point where Mahoney felt he could at least be heard.
"As I was trying to say," he bellowed, "the end of the strike at Kroger's is due to one thing, and one thing alone, the efforts of one man."
Hoffa turned to Chiaro. "Jesus," he said, "how much has he been drinking?"
"And here is the man who led us through the fight," Mahoney thundered. "Here is the man who beat Kroger, the man who broke them down and took us in, our new business manager, Red Bennett."
Hoffa stared at him. "Holy jumping Jesus," he breathed. "That's the asshole who was on top of the truck last night." Buttoning his coat, he started walking toward the door. "Where you going, Jimmy?" Chiaro asked. Hoffa shrugged. "Out of here. I need some air. The bullshit is up to my chin and rising." "I'll go with you," Chiaro said, slipping into his coat.
"Me too,"
said Fitzsimmons, who, Hoffa could see, was farther gone than Chiaro. Falling in behind Fitzsimmons was a young man Hoffa had never seen before.
"If you hadn't gotten the wops to back off,"
Fitzsimmons said to Hoffa once they were outside, "we never would have won the strike."
"That's right,"
Hoffa said brusquely.
"Jimmy," Fitzsimmons said, "I want you to meet my nephew, Pete Connolly."
"Hi, glad to meet you," Hoffa said, extending his hand. Connolly grimaced when Hoffa gave him his killer handshake, honed by his weightlifting program.
This is a real pleasure. I mean a real fucking pleasure.
That's okay, kid, Hoffa said. No need to overdo it. Connolly smiled.
Yeah, Petey, go have a good time, said
Fitzsimmons. Turning to Hoffa, Fitzsimmons slapped him on the back, bringing a frown to Hoffa's face.
Jimmy, I got a lot to learn from you,
Fitzsimmons said, slowly shaking his head. Hoffa smiled.
That's true,
he agreed.
How did you do it, Jimmy?
Hoffa looked at him.
You want to know what I did? Okay, I'll tell you. I went to the wops. I told them, don't drive Kroger trucks. Don't provide scab labor. Help the Teamsters. And the chief wop, a guy named Sciala, said, why should I? And I said, let the Teamsters drive the Kroger trucks. Half the trucks we drive, we take them to a warehouse of your choosing, and you steal the contents.
Jimmy, Fitzsimmons said, as much to himself as to Hoffa,
you're one fucking guy.
Louder, he added,
Me? I'm going to go out and get drunk.
He giggled.
Get drunker, that is. I don't blame you, Hoffa said. It's a great victory, a famous victory.
Want to come with me? Fitzsimmons asked hopefully. Hoffa smiled.
Nah, I got some things I got to do, he said.
Oh, okay, Jimmy. Okay. Maybe next time. Chiaro, who had been talking to another teamster a few feet away, noticed Hoffa leaving and jogged to catch up.
What did you tell him?
He asked Hoffa when they were half a block away. Hoffa thought carefully before he answered.
Here's the thing, he said slowly, picking his words guardedly. A guy's close to you, you can't slight him. A real grievance can be resolved. Differences can be resolved. But an imaginary hurt, a slight, you do that and the motherfucker's gonna hate you until the day he dies. What's that up there? Hoffa said 5 minutes later. Looks like somebody's in trouble.
50 yards ahead of them, a van was pulling over to the curb and a driver was kneeling in front of the vehicle, trying to align a jack with the axle.
Got a problem, buddy?
Hoffa asked when he and Chiaro reached the vehicle. The driver, slightly out of breath from working the jack, looked up in mild surprise.
Nah, just a fucking flat, he said. Happens all the time. How about we give you a hand, Hoffa said, stripping off his overcoat and suit coat and rolling up his sleeves.
He looked at the flat and at the jack.
Pal, he said to the driver, see if you can find me something to chock this wheel with, just to make sure the fucker don't roll or nothing. I've been thinking, Jimmy,
Chiaro said after the driver had wandered off to search for a rock or a piece of lumber.
That's good,
Hoffa puffed, putting pressure on the tire iron to loosen the nuts.
It don't hurt a bit to think. I've been wondering, Jimmy, what kind of money you make organizing?
Hoffa stopped and looked at him.
$10 each new member, he snapped, plus 10% of the first year's dues. That's what you make? Chiaro said in surprise.
Hoffa grinned at him.
No, he said. What I make is none of your fucking business. That's what I'm going to pay you if you come to work for me.
The driver returned with a broken brick, a piece large enough to slip under the wheel.
Thanks, Hoffa said, accepting the brick. Now I want you to listen to something.
I'll listen to any man who ain't afraid to get his hands dirty, the truck driver told Hoffa. Turning to Chiaro, he added, that's the first man I ever seen who was willing to take off a suit jacket to help a trucker change a tire.
Someday, Chiaro said, beaming proudly at Hoffa, this man's going to be President of the United States.
Hoffa looked up.
Fuck that, he said. Someday I'm going to be president, all right, but it's going to be president of the fucking Teamsters.
(1975).
We've been here how long now?
Hoffa asked rhetorically, glancing at his watch.
45 minutes. That cocksucker's kept us sitting in a parked car on the hottest day of the year for 45 minutes. Tell you what we're going to do, Hoffa finally said. I want you to call him up.
Chiaro, who had been about to open the door, stopped.
If that's what you want, Jimmy, but I can tell you right now, he ain't going to be in. At least that's what his gophers are going to tell me. Call him up anyways, Hoffa insisted.
All this shit for just a simple meeting, a problem that could be resolved very easily if only that fucker would show up. Chiaro remained silent, letting Hoffa have his say. Hoffa, calmer, smiled slightly. Tell you what, you go to the diner, sit lookout, see what's going on in there. In the meantime, you call him. Tell him he'd better get his ass down here, because if he don't, we're leaving. Chiaro nodded. Wait a minute, Hoffa said, putting a hand on Chiaro's shoulder. Chiaro, who had been about to step out of the car, turned to look at him. He raised his eyebrows. Let me have your pistol. Chiaro stopped short. Hoffa had never made a request like that before. He had always disdained weapons, at least as far as he was personally concerned. Hoffa was a street fighter, a man who was proud of his prowess with his fists. You don't even know how to use it. Leave me the peace, he commanded softly. You go on in the diner, and you try to call D'Alessandro. Tell him to get his fucking ass over here right now, or we're leaving, okay? Chiaro nodded. You want something while I'm there? He asked Hoffa. A newspaper, a cup of coffee? Hoffa nodded. I'll take some coffee, he said. But what I really want is that fucker D'Alessandro to get here so we can have our meeting and I can go home to my wife like I promised. Okay, Chiaro said. I'll be back in 20 minutes. You know where I am. Go, Hoffa ordered, waving him away. You try to relax, Chiaro replied. This ain't the fucking end of the world. It's just a goddamn meeting. Hoffa didn't reply. His attention was turned to the pistol that Chiaro had given him, an ugly black revolver of the type he had seen on countless TV dramas. Sighing, he bent over and put the pistol on the floor of the car, half under the seat. Chiaro opened the door and walked inside. How many truck stops have I been in my life, he thought. How many times have I been in this truck stop? He glanced around the room, impressed by the size of the crowd. Although he saw several men he recognized, he did not stop to exchange greetings. Instead, he walked deliberately across the room, down the length of the counter, passing several truckers who were hunched over their meals, and went straight to the phone booth in the back. Instead of being empty, as he had anticipated, the booth was occupied by a young trucker who was hunched over in earnest conversation, one finger plugged into his ear. Chiaro cursed under his breath. This could take all day, he told himself. Walking closer to the booth, he tapped on the glass. When he did, the driver looked up, revealing an unexpectedly youthful face. He's just a kid, was Chiaro's first thought. Jesus, they're getting younger every day. Slowly, almost insolently, the youth looked Chiaro up and down. The youth raised his hand with the index finger extended, the universal signal for I'll be through in just a minute. In the meantime, don't bug me.